Good afternoon, everybody. Scott Carson, founder and CEO of Powered by MRP, and also the host of MedTech Marketplace. Pretty excited today to bring everybody together with a group of people that are either customers or friends or both. People that I've known in some cases for a couple of decades, and some of them new friends, all of which have incredibly unique experiences in how to aggregate patients and convert those patients into successful experiences and revenue. And so I'm going to do a quick introduction to each one of the panelists, and because I know them personally, and then Mason Golden, who's our VP of Product Strategy, who knows many of the people on this panel as well. He's going to begin by just rocking through some questions and opening it up for the group over the next hour. I'll feed those questions as they come through to Mason, so he's not interrupted in his thought pattern, but you're welcome to ask questions. I won't be able to get to all of them given the amount of attendees that have signed up. There's roughly about 200 attendees that have signed up. This will go live, or this will go on streaming video shortly after. If you have any questions, you can refer back to that. Also, we'll give out Mason's contact information at the end. You can reach out to him. He'll coordinate any questions you might have with the panelists, and if needed, he can get you connected with them on an as-needed basis. So we'll get started with some quick introductions. No real order here, but I want to get started with your moderator, Mason. Mason and I have known each other from the industry for many years. I'm guessing somewhere in the 10 to 15 years, Mason maybe longer. Mason's had an incredible career. He's worked for many of the manufacturers, from Alma to Luminous to Cynosure Palomar, and then he decided to leave the dark side and become a Jedi Knight, and went to work for CSI, California Skin Institute. For those of you that do not know CSI is roughly 50 locations, dermatology in California, and Mason ran aesthetics there for 5 years with a employee base of roughly 200, a budget of about 20 million. And when it comes to return on investment, return on capital, and patient conversion, Mason is one of the leading he's one of the leading kind of theorists and putting that into practice in the country. Mason joined our team a couple of months ago after leaving that successful career at CSI, and he's helping us interface with our customers' kind of emerging technology. Also on the panel is Kevin Kassover, and interestingly, I've known Kevin about just as long. Kevin actually and I met when he was running CSI, the same group that ultimately Mason, I think, took over. I don't know the exact timing, but he went on to where he's Vice President of Practice Growth and Marketing at Topex, which many of you know and use. And he's had an incredible background in practice development, working within private equity, within plastics, and just knows pretty much everyone in the industry from a strategic standpoint. And I think he's going to be an excellent panelist on how to really drive patient acquisition and customer experience, as we talked about. Dr. Kyle Cox is also a panelist, and Dr. Cox is a new customer and a new friend of MRP. But one of the things that I found most fascinating about her is really her focus on honesty and integrity and teamwork, and her passion towards aesthetics. And that's core to us at MRP, and that means everything to us, because we believe that this is an industry in which we're here to serve clinicians, and in turn, clinicians like Dr. Cox, they're there to serve patients. So we think this is a collaboration where we work together in service, and I think you're going to find her experience really valuable when it comes to self-paying patients and in this industry. Also on the panel is Eric Wilson. Eric, I met this past year. He's got an incredibly interesting background as a football coach, and somehow bumped into the aesthetics industry, primarily on the plastic side, where he owned and operated plastics clinics. And then he merged those two things together, where he's now a coach and a practice development expert within the plastic community, mostly working for physicians that are really reaching a milestone in their practice where they're kind of running out of energy and runway to kind of reinvigorate what they're doing and kind of take them to the next level. And I think he's going to be an incredible resource to the group. Last on our list is my very dear friend, Chris Group, who I've known, again, a very long time. For those of you that don't know, Chris recently sold her business, Skin Stylist, to Hydrofacial Beauty Health, a publicly traded company, and had a very successful exit. She is the patent holder and developer of numerous aesthetic patents, which she continues to develop in her head, probably while we're on this call as we speak. But prior to that, she ran one of the most successful training schools in the country, both online and offline. She continues to be a practitioner, and she has recently moved to would you call that the Midwest, Chris? Is that the Midwest or okay, the Midwest?
That's where I came from originally.
Yes, moved from Scottsdale to the Midwest, where she's decided to be a farmer. And so I'm not sure that much of her current experience will be applicable, but we'll see how we can blend that in. So
very attractive farm animals.
That's right. So I want to thank everybody for joining, and super excited that we're getting ready to get going. So Mason, if you could take it over, that'd be great.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Okay, everyone. So kind of the formulation for the topics is really based around what we hear from you, the customer, as some of the pain points that we could lend our experience to and do a deeper dive for you to try to resolve some of these tendencies that tend to be more weaknesses within practices. So the first one is really around training and incentives for staff. And this isn't necessarily training on devices or techniques for injectables, et cetera. It's more around training in conversation, training in the understanding of the business of aesthetics, and also converting medical patients and the ability to communicate to them to convert them to cash pay services or aesthetics. So that's really the kind of the background about the first segment here. And I want to start by throwing it to Chris, actually, if it'd be okay with you, Chris, of course, because you ran a school. And I know that your school was focused on techniques of services, but I'm certain, knowing you, that there was a focus on some type of strategy around training for staff, training in sales or upselling. Can you just roughly touch on some best practices that you found to be successful in your tenure?
Sure. So when you look at the office as a whole, you've got obviously your front office, you've got your back office, you've got your providers. And one of the things that I found, and will go towards kind of the incentivizing, and a couple of pitfalls that I fell into and figured out how to get back out of them, is, people love to incentivize their providers, their staff, all of that. They think that it's going to continue to work in their favor. But one of the biggest things that I found is if you offer an incentive and you have it where it's starting to be where they always expect it, it actually becomes a demotivator and it doesn't incentivize it. So what I found is if we offer any kind of incentive to any type of employee, whether it being a provider or front office, back office, whoever it is within the practice, because all of them have a role and all of them are important, it really has to be something that's infrequent and unexpected. And it sounds kind of counterintuitive, because why would you want to catch somebody doing something good and you want to incentivize on it at that moment. Whether it's like, hey, you're doing a great job, here's a Starbucks card, or hey, you're doing a great job, this is what you get for it. What I did with one of my employees is when we were selling Skin Stylist, is if she was able to upgrade or kind of change the system or do something, she got money. She got $100. And what happened is she started expecting it, and she called it her taco money, because she went to this taco place and got tacos. And it got to a point where if she didn't get it, she's like, well, where's my taco money? And it started decentivizing her, and I didn't get the same work output from her. So I started changing it up, and if I wanted to incentivize somebody, I would catch them doing something great and then give them the incentive there. That way you're still getting better production out of your staff, but they're not coming to expect it and they don't know when it's coming. So if you're going to do any type of incentive, I would highly recommend that you not make it a regular incentive, because then it becomes, they think of part of their salary or part of their pay, and if you take it away from them, they get really upset. The other thing is the front office person is always, in my opinion, it's kind of the face of the practice when you walk in. You want that front desk person, not just checking somebody in, but when they go to check them in, and let's say they're coming in for a certain treatment, they're coming in for an injectable or they're coming in for a laser treatment. One of the downfalls I see in practices is not having that person talk about everything else that you're doing. Oh, you're coming in for, neurotoxin. Is there any other concerns that you have? Do you know that we offer all of these different procedures? Sometimes within our jobs, we get very focused and very one-minded. And so one of the things that helped in my practice was making sure that everybody on board knew all of the things that we were doing, so we could bring up conversation. So by the time they got back to their room, they were able to have a conversation with the provider about other things besides just the one specific thing they came into. The other thing that I would think with, if we're going to be talking about discounts and things like that for the patients themselves, it's a totally different thing. But having everybody on kind of the same page is a team approach, as opposed to you've got your injector, you've got your laser tech, you've got your esthetician. Everybody should be cross-talking about all of the procedures that they have, because you may get them back to the room and they're like, oh, well, I didn't know that you guys had somebody who did filler. I didn't know you had a laser tech or an esthetician.
Right.
So making your incentives not knowing when they're going to get them, I think, is a better way to go, and incentivizing in the moment. It's kind of like if you have a dog and it does something wrong, you don't want to punish it, I don't think at all, but 3 hours after it happens, you want to basically catch them while they're doing something good and give them a reward for doing that.
Yeah, I think that's great. One of the things I was thinking about when you were answering was about my own experience managing a practice, and I worked for a very conservative business owner who erred on the side of conservative around the legality of commissioning staff in any capacity within the medical environment, especially specific in California, where it's more of a litigious state than most. So it's an interesting, I guess the point is, it's not always money is the incentive, right? There are other ways to incentivize. So I find that to be really interesting. Dr. Cox, I'm curious for you, with the high level of care and focus on your patients in a smaller office setting or practice setting, how do you work with your staff that manages the front desk or the patient process and train them on the wide variety of services that you offer? How do they become advocates for you and the services that you do?
You're right. I have a very small boutique practice. My background was in multi-specialty, big practices, and I really made a decision for myself to be in a small practice. I have 2 employees right now. They'll probably go to 5, but I think they have to participate. That's the thing. You have to be what you want patients to participate in. And so when they are employees, I want them to not only know and be knowledgeable about all the services that provide, surgical and non-surgical, but I want them to participate in it. You have to have a passion yourself. So that's like the first filter with hiring anyone and engaging them, because if you don't care about aesthetics, then why would you want to be here? Why would you help it grow? So the other thing is not only their participation, I give them, I want them to try everything we do, from skin health, skincare to microneedling, injectables, Botox, filler. I want them to engage in it so they can better talk to patients and educate and empower patients, and that will help them be natural when they do engage with them. As far as any, incentives to them, I don't, since it's so small, it's really hard for me to speak on that on a grand scale, because again, I don't have an incentivizing program currently. But I think the most important thing that's bode well for me, and I really make the decision to make sure, is that anyone who works here, from the receptionist to if I have a PA to laser tech or anyone in between, you have to have a passion for this. You have to have a passion for this just as much as I have a passion for oculoplastics. Because if it doesn't work that way, then we won't be cohesive. So that's, kind of where my philosophy comes from, making everything kind of gel and with staff. Hopefully that makes sense and answers some of the questions.
Yeah, definitely. It's fantastic. I appreciate it. Kevin, any suggestions in your experience? Kevin, you've also managed, smaller practices in large. Talk to me about prior experience where, staff training showed value or realized higher revenue or better patient outcomes, even in your current role or in past.
Sure. So I think it's, if you take a step back, what I'd like to talk about, it kind of piggybacks on what Chris was saying and the doctor was saying, which is that there's a confluence of ways to grow your business. And I think one of the things that I was talking to you and to Scott about with your business is that sometimes you want to wait a beat before actually buying a laser or device, because you want to have these things in place. And the first is, and the most important, which the doctor said, is belief at the top. You need to believe that the treatment is efficacious, that the skincare is efficacious, and that needs to be in the culture of your practice, whether you lead by example or you have managers or other people that are leading by example. And then as part of that, usually that has a halo effect, because part of that culture is making sure that everyone in the practice has either had the treatment, tried the product, or can speak to the product, because the language that people use is around understanding and discussing these things very comfortably. And that also ties in with training and education. So whether you're taking advantage in, let's say, skincare of a vendor who comes in to train, or for that matter, a provider who believes in the treatment, then you've got some of the building blocks that I think really help to, one, educate patients, and two, convert those patients. And that's where there's also a level of confidence, I think, that comes with the provider feeling confident in the treatments, which is why you also want to take that time on training. And so I'm kind of using a lot of really vague terms, but really it's about all of these things coming together. And in terms of an incentive, I think there's a lot of different ways, and we can talk offline about specific skincare incentives. But when it comes to actual treatments, I think the only other way to go is if you're really looking at goals that you're setting for the office and communicating regularly to your team.
That's great. I was on the phone yesterday with a practice, and we were specifically talking about provider confidence. But I think, to your point, you need to convey a culture of confidence, and that is not just from the top, but all the way to the bottom. And I think that sometimes gets lost in the shuffle, so to speak. So, like, for example, one of the things I've learned from Scott is to have really strong standardized messaging across the entire organization. And so when I was managing a large practice, which was a very, very challenging environment, having a number of locations with, high staff turnover, et cetera, how do you get everybody speaking the same language? You've got to start by creating the tools or partnering with somebody like an Eric or somebody else that can help you on the sales consulting side work a process or a plan and then build that culture of confidence. That's fantastic. It's really good. Anything else? Scott, you're muted.
Mute. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
One thing I wanted to just comment on that and was touched on by a couple of the panelists, and Kevin touched on it briefly at the beginning of what he was saying, is in the beginning of my experience stepping into the space, I didn't know a great deal about it. So I immersed myself in mostly dermatology to understand how the practices worked. And I spent a lot of time developing incentive plans with them, because it's one of the first, it's interesting you start with that, because it's almost always the first thing they want to know is how do you incentivize the staff? And I spent a tremendous amount of time trying to understand this. And one of the key things that we found is that training became incredibly important. And here's why. If you put an incentive plan in place, and the people aren't universally trained, they're going to sell what it is they know because that's what they're comfortable with. So you end up having misaligned incentives because the people aren't cross-trained on the technologies. So one person will do fractionated erbium really well, another person will do hair removal really well, another one will do photofacial, rejuvenation, somebody will do chemical peels, and you end up with patients that have inconsistent opportunities and experiences because the incentive plan wasn't tied to the training experience. So training becomes fundamental in executing on an incentive plan, because if you don't, you're going to end up with patients that aren't getting offered the treatments that they probably need.
Yeah, that's great. Very good. Anything else on this topic before moving on?
Awesome, let's
I
go.
was just gonna,
Go ahead.
yeah, I was gonna,
Oh, Eric, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah. The one thing I was gonna say is just a differentiator in that I think a lot of what we were talking about was incentivizing providers, but in some practices you have a salesperson. Plastic surgery practices almost always have a salesperson, a patient coordinator. Some larger med spas have a salesperson, and those people are very frequently motivated by incentives. But I completely agree with the panel. I do not like commission-based incentives because they don't align very frequently with the goals of the practice. And so I think if you do have an incentive structure for salespeople, making sure that they align with the practice goals through more of a bonus structure versus a commission structure is something that's very, very productive. Whereas you may create a quarterly goal for the practice that has to do with your growth goals, and then your salesperson have a bonus based upon their achievement of the quarterly growth goal, so that now they're directly aligned with the growth goal of the practice. When you're on a commission structure, just for example, let's say your goal for the month is a $300,000 revenue goal, and your patient coordinator sells $260,000. Well, you as a practice have come in $40,000 under your goal, but if you're paying a commission, your salesperson's getting commissioned on $260,000. So they're not incentivized to hit the goal. They're incentivized to sell enough money that they make the bonus they want to make. So if you have a salesperson or salespeople in your office and you do have an incentive-based structure, I would just always recommend that you have more of a bonus structure where you set what the bonus is at the time, and then you align that with the goal of the practice, so that if the practice goal isn't met, then the incentivization structure isn't met.
One thing to piggyback on that, that's an excellent point, because I worked with a lot of, in training, a lot of providers that have a salesperson at the front. And the salesperson, one, if they don't know anything about the procedures, they're selling whatever is going to get them their bonus. But then the patient comes back to the room and, you know, let's say they're doing hair reduction and they haven't taken into account that the person has a sunburn. And so sometimes the provider has actually been told by the practice that you have to do this procedure. Well, we all know what's going to happen is they're going to burn the heck out of them, then they're going to get sued. So it's one of those things where salespeople are great because they make the world go round and make things sell. But if it's not in the patient's best interest to have that treatment at that time, then the provider is the person who gets tagged for doing a procedure that the salesperson sold. So I think you're 100% right, and you have to kind of break that apart, because we want to do what's best in our patient's interest, not what's just based on what we need for sales. So there's been a huge disconnect between the salesperson and the actual provider. I mean, our job as a provider is to do safe, effective, profitable, and safety is the first part of that. But if you've got somebody selling, well, I told them they're going to get a photofacial. Well, I can't do a photofacial. They're the wrong skin type, or it's not the right time, or they've had sun exposure. They have to work together. And that's one of the biggest problems I've seen in just incentivizing the sales force and not having some stopgaps to make sure that it's a treatment that can be done, and it's a treatment that can be done on that patient that day.
And I would say too, just, I think one of the things that if you're running a spa or a med spa, that's a best practice you can take from plastic surgery or from a surgical practice, in that the clinician always sees the patient before the salesperson does. And so the salesperson's what they're selling is based upon the recommendation of the clinician as opposed to the other way around. I think when you're doing it the other way around, I completely agree with Chris. You're setting yourself up for a situation that's not in the best interest of the patient.
I totally agree with what you were just saying, Derek, about that, because my situation is unique. I don't have people recommending treatments. I do everything. I'm the only surgeon here. I don't have a PA, I don't have an injector, I don't have a laser tech. And it's partially designed that way from the beginning. I may grow to have to delegate other things, but right now, patients see me first. And the number 1, 2, 3 thing I do is brow lids, upper lid surgery, and lower lid surgery. So the incentive, I will let the staff know, like, hey, our goal is to do 15 breaths a month, upper and lowers, and they can engage in that. But I'm the one who, since I only do the surgery, I'm the one who sees the patient, recommends the treatments, and they help me by following up with the patients to see if they want to do the treatments that are suggested. So that's just, I agree with you. That's a different perspective.
Great. Very impressive. I appreciate that. That's all very, very helpful. Let's move to the next section. And if there's questions from the audience, we can address those on this topic after the fact. But the second segment here is marketing to medical patients. This is like the Rubik's Cube of aesthetic, non-aesthetic practices. Very challenging nut to crack, so to speak. I think that simplistically, you could say, well, isn't Botox the answer because it's the gateway drug? I don't know if it's that simple. Maybe you guys could tell us that it is that simple. Let's start with Kevin, because the other kind of, air quote layup for converting medical patients is skincare naturally. And I know Kevin has a lot of strategies around this topic. So Kevin, just talk to us about what you personally have seen or through topics in the lens of converting medical patients to a cash payer or aesthetic services.
Sure, and I'm sure the panel has a lot to say on this. For me, when I was working at the various practices I've been at, it was all about utilizing some sort of version of a cosmetic interest questionnaire, something that allows the door to open about addressing other skin concerns or triggering the conversation beyond, let's say, the acne treatment, or for that matter, the bleph that they're in there for, right? Something that allows the provider to more confidently address, or for that matter, a patient care coordinator to address maybe so there are other skin concerns. Even if it's a basic checklist of melasma, wrinkles, et cetera, and then what goes with that in that conversion opportunity is a really well-trained provider, a provider who ideally knows some of the treatments that can address each of those skin concerns, ideally well-versed in a device. You've sold them, Scott and Mason, but ideally is able to take that patient from their initial concern for the visit into addressing their greater skin concerns. An interesting tidbit about skincare, people talk about a neuromodulator or Botox being the gateway, right? Many providers are trained on it, can use that as a way to open the door. But believe it or not, one thing I've been reading about recently is the gateway product is a tinted sunscreen. And so, if it's your brand, clearly I work for a private label or a practice branded skincare company. I think it only instills confidence based on the efficacy and the quality of that product to then be the gateway to Botox, to then be the gateway to devices, to also be the gateway to surgery. But I think it really starts with a really simple cosmetic interest questionnaire, and or someone who's trained and comfortable enough to say, tell me what else concerns you about your skin.
Yeah, that's great. One of the other strategies that we employed in our prior roles was having skincare protocols built around medical indications, right? So you have a higher level of product that would align with a particular medical condition, may it be, acne or what have you. So those are great strategies. Chris, Dr. Cox, Eric, just loosely, any thoughts or suggestions on what I call the Rubik's Cube of cross-selling here.
Yeah, so a lot of the practices that I work in are converting from a medical insurance-based to cash-based businesses. And one of the biggest downfalls that I see is once they start doing this, they don't let anybody know. They don't talk about it. You may see one banner in the waiting room, but they don't talk about it. And I'm like, you guys, if a patient trusts you enough with their health care, they're going to trust you with their skincare as well. So a really simple thing that people can do is I used to have them basically make a binder, a lookbook basically of the treatments that they're going to be offering. They could put things in there if they had some BNAs. They could put information on all of the procedures that they're doing. And then whoever, if it's a large enough practice, whoever is flipping the room for the providers, take that book and put it directly on the chair the patient has to sit on. Because they tend to want to put it in the magazine rack. But if you put it on the chair, the person that's going to sit on the chair has two options. Either sit on it and have it go up their butt, which nobody wants, or take a look at it. So that little simple thing that only costs a couple of dollars was really effective in getting the word out. It's kind of took the conversation and opened it up as a conversation, and allowed them to, while they're sitting there waiting for the provider, to go through some of the information. And then when they come in, oh, I didn't know that you did this. It's a super, super inexpensive way of converting a medical patient into a cosmetic patient. But also having, if you're sending out newsletters and things like that, they have to open their mouths. That is one of the biggest, it's like they keep the best kept secret that they've gone into the cosmetic space, but nobody's talking about it. They don't talk about it at the front desk. The providers don't talk about it. Nobody talks about it. So by doing a couple of little things, it will help open up the conversation so it's not quite so awkward.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say just the provider is the key in this, in my opinion. So you can have your front desk talk about it. You can have your ancillary staff talk about it. But for some reason, every time I start to work with a new client, they think that's everyone else's job and not theirs as the clinician. And if you're a physician and you're a provider and you want to drive this in your practice, then it's something that you have to talk about. And I think sometimes clinicians and physicians especially almost think of it like if I start to talk about an aesthetic procedure or a device that I'm all of a sudden selling something. And I think the idea of like a lot of people have to get away from this idea of anything that's cash pay as a transaction and instead start to look at their aesthetic practice as an extension of the relationship they have with the patient. You're not trying to push something on the patient that they don't want, but at the same time, you want to create the dialogue because many of these patients do want these services and you're the one they want to talk to about it. So have the forthrightness to just ask a patient, if you got them in the room and you're dealing with them on a medical issue and you're done with that and you have an existing relationship, do you have any aesthetic goals that you'd like to talk about while we're in the room together? And then just use that as a transition opportunity to then put them with the right provider in your practice, or if it's you, to continue that conversation. But your aesthetic practice should just be an extension of your patient relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. I actually see a lot of medical patients as well. Like I'm about 60-70% aesthetic and the rest is medical. The number one medical consult that I get is vision impairing their upper lids because there's a dichotomy with blepharoplasty. Are you cosmetic or are you insurance? And insurance has criteria. Just because your eye doctor thinks so, just because whatever, it's not a subjective thing, it's objective evidence. Nonetheless, so I just wrote down a couple of things. I think the key that has been successful for our practice has been you have to exude that energy. A lot of medical patients will come into this office. It's very plastic surgery oriented. It's very cozy and it's meant to be that way. But I don't want them to be intimidated because they're coming for something medical from their medical doctor. So that's the first step, looking that way because they're like, oh, you're not like my internist or my PCP when I walk in. So they're immediately kind of like, should I be here? This is a medical issue. But then having nice staff, I think the biggest thing is creating a safe space so they feel comfortable discussing these things. How do you open someone up? How do you engage someone to talk about things that are vulnerable to them? It is an art, and you have to look within first, because we all have things that we are vulnerable, about. And so just look to that within yourself. How would you like to talk to someone? How would you like to be engaged to speak about those things? So I'm very comfortable talking to my patients and being very straightforward about aesthetic concerns. They easily are converted when they have a medical thing and they ask me, okay, what about these bags then? They just release. It's like an exhalation. They just ask me. They just feel comfortable, and they usually bring it up. I usually don't have to, but I'm comfortable doing that. And it's just a casual question, like Eric said. Hey, do you have any concerns? Leave it open-ended. Let them ask. Don't start pointing things out about them, like we need to do this, that. I think that's a really bad rep and a pet peeve of patients that I've received feedback on, where they may have seen another provider and like, hey, they just started talking about blah, blah, blah. Of course, there's a fine line, but you just have to, I think, being open-ended. Another thing that happens is if someone has a medical procedure and then they come back and then they start asking about, well, what about skincare? What about this? Because we have a lot of educational material. In fact, our post-op, we have a post-op healing bundle. Whether you're medical or cosmetic, you all need a vitamin C. You all need a sunscreen. We promote that. We say you need this for healing. We get scientific. We tell them why, because I think educating to empower patients is huge. Once they know why and they mentally get it, they're much easier to accept or talk to you and do other things. So I think it's just, literature, educational material, exuding that energy and not being afraid to talk to them, because you have vulnerabilities too. So I'm just thinking it like the human aspect of it. But I really think it begins with educating to empower. So,
Well said.
Mason, if I might, one more thing to piggyback on what everybody else was saying. One of the parts of your question was about marketing to med patients, and certainly conversion was part of it. So I want to address the marketing to med patients part of this, or marketing in general, which is that I think the most successful practices that I've seen have a calendared, systematic marketing, right? And they're establishing their brand through their expertise in their marketing, whether it be a combination of informative newsletter-like articles, which they might also be posting on social, but one where there's also awareness about the cosmetic procedures and the problems or the issues that they address. So I would say, and this ties in with everything, especially with devices, systematic, regular marketing to your existing patient base. And then if you're more of an aesthetic practice, that you're dedicating 5, 10, or more percent of your budget potentially to marketing externally if you're growing and if you're looking to get new patients and acquisition. So there is a budget involved. Your biggest bang for the buck is always going to be systematic, regular marketing to your existing patients.
That's good. Just to jump back to what Dr. Cox was saying and to what Eric was saying, one of the things that's so incredible about Dr. Cox is your way that you communicate with patients, and the way that you communicate about communicating to patients. It's really beautiful the way that you handle it. The question is, how do we make more use? Like, what is the? And I'm giving you kudos, but also at the same time being serious. Like, how is it? How can we replicate these techniques or train these providers in that light? Eric, is it hiring somebody like you, or is there a secret training sauce somewhere that I've never seen? This has always been a problem that I've encountered. I'm just curious, like what you guys think about, is there a training school out there for providers and communication in the room?
Yeah. So I just had this conversation. I have 2 different clients, different parts of the country. One who does an amazing job at this, has very strong social media following because of it, and one who is what I would say is probably pretty typical. And he asked me, why is my social media not growing and so-and-so's is? And my answer to him was, that person is very genuine and shows who they are to their patient. And so whether you're talking about social media or whether you're literally in a conversation with that patient, the thing that sets people apart who I think are really successful in this communication is just having a real dialogue with that patient, asking that patient a lot of questions and understanding what that patient is going through, but being real with that patient. What I see with a lot of clients that I first start working with is there's very much still in this kind of mentality like from med school where they're talking to someone and they kind of have a canned presentation. They're almost presenting to their patient as opposed to having a dialogue with their patient. And I think the people who do this really, really well are those who have a patient relationship. That patient trusts you. That's why they're in your room. That's why they trust you as their physician. So you take the opportunity that patient's giving you and get to know them better. Have a dialogue with them, understand what they really want to achieve. And that's the natural way to go about this. I think the idea that you have to talk to people and like Dr. Cox said earlier, like where you're kind of just randomly talking about something you think that you're trying to drive in your practice, that's not the approach. The approach is, what does this person need? What does this person want? What are their goals? And just have a normal dialogue with them, and that's going to naturally occur.
Yeah.
I agree. I think everything you just said was top notch. Completely agree. I think I lead my consultations with, what was your journey here? Why did you call and make this appointment? And what is your goal? And I hand them the mirror and I want them to show me. It's not me guessing. I want you to tell me, and then I can be honest with you about what I can and can't do. And then I think just naturally enjoying what you do. I enjoy aesthetics. I drink my own Kool-Aid. So I think that is helpful as well, because when you do it, you just exude it. That's what I was trying to say earlier. When it just comes out naturally. But I agree with everything you said.
Yeah, there's something about like establishing trust through sincerity. I think that's kind of the point. Yeah, there's something infectious about it.
Okay. One more thing, I'm so sorry. I say educate to empower a lot. That is the mission of my practice. And I found to be, when you walk people through why a certain treatment, well, why do I need a chemical pill or a laser or a microneedling? What does it do? I literally have anatomy kind of lessons, very basic, not something too in-depth or too complex, but what they understand and have great analogies. So if they mentally understand, they're much more likely to engage. I mean, they get why physically they look in the mirror, what they see, but do they understand why before and after? What does that change scientifically happening? And I think people just have this aha moment and they're very thankful and like, wow, that's cool. And then they get it and it just becomes cyclical. This is a part of their flow, like a yoga flow. They engage and they continue.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. All right. If in the interest of time here, let's just move on to the next topic. That was very informative. I appreciate all the feedback there. Segment 3 here, this is discounting versus giveaways. And really the idea behind this topic, we talk about this a lot with customers on the phone. This is really like, for those of you that follow social media and follow Gary Vaynerchuk, who's an entrepreneur really all over social media, he is very big into talking about the benefits of a giveaway over discounting. I thought it would be interesting with the vast experience on this call and this webinar to just gauge what your feedback and your experience is in either or, like has too much discounting created too many short-term relationships within a practice that you've been a part of, or have giveaways created a response that's contrary to what you think it would have done. I'm just curious, just opening up. Chris, you took yourself off mute, so I'm going to call on you. I'm curious for your feedback on this, and just very loose and open-ended about discounting versus giveaways.
Yeah, and I not only do this in my own practice, but I teach this a lot. And I use the analogy, it's like, because people, especially if they're going to roll out a new procedure, their first instinct is to discount. The problem is discounting from the very beginning is a lot like putting a pair of jeans on, jumping into the lake, getting out of the lake, taking the jeans off, and then trying to put them back on. It's a struggle. Once the pants are down, it's hard to get them back up. And the same thing happens with discounting. Instead of discounting, like when I first started with microneedling back in was like 2011, is instead of discounting it, I came up with the price that I was comfortable with for one area. And then what I told them is you can pick a bonus area, either your neck or your décolleté, and that is your bonus for this treatment on this time. And what it allowed me to do was, it was something, and you always want to pick a bonus if you're going to do that, is something that takes very little time, very little money, but it adds a lot of value. So for me, I used the same cartridge, so I didn't increase my consumable price. It took me maybe 5 minutes and a little bit of serum. They got $150 value. I kept my original price, and then when that bonus fell off, I was still at the same price that I was at. So, you know, talking to doctors, well, we're going to roll it out at, you know, $225, just pick a number. And it's like really hard to, once that patient gets used to that price, to increase the price. So for me, I don't discount at all. I may add something of value. If I'm lasering or hair reduction a guy's back, maybe I'll do his ears for free. It might be, if I'm lasering somebody's legs, maybe I do what I call hobbit toes, hairy toes for free. It's 10 pulses if they have 10 toes. So it's very, very small on my end, but very, very big for them. When it comes down to, you know, Groupons and things like that, I've got the perfect name and the perfect response when they ask me if I'm going to have a Groupon. I'm like, my last name is Group, I'm Group Off. No. You're paying for my skill, my care, my judgment. That's what you're paying for. I don't discount. I've been doing this way too long to have a discount. But I do build in value, whether that is, you know, teaching a nurse or somebody who didn't know how to do dermaplaning, how to do dermaplaning, because as a standalone procedure, it's $100. My cost for it is $1.10. They can add that in. If you buy X amount of units of a neurotoxin or a thing of, you know, a syringe of filler, you get a free dermaplaning. You always want to pick things that are very high value but very low cost, and roll them in that way, so the patient feels like they're getting something extra, but it's really not impacting your time or your money. So that's what I do in my practice, and that's what I teach.
That's good. You know, real quickly, and I know that we're butting up against the time here, but one of the things that I see a lot are practices that don't engage their reps, specifically their injectable reps, which is stunning to me. But like, talk about a way to, you know, work with one of your vendors to help provide you with a way to upsell or create cross sells without you having to pay for it. Like, engage your injectable reps. That's really what they're there for. They're practice development people, and they're very good at it. So I think that's really important. Real quickly, I wanted to throw something to Dr. Cox, because again, I know we want to have some time for questions, and we're 6 minutes to the hour. But Dr. Cox, on the last segment, we wanted to talk about combining a variety of services or products to improve patient outcomes, and specifically like develop personalized treatment plans for a patient, or how to do so. Can you just touch on what your secret sauce is and what your magic is? Because I know that's really right up your alley. You do so many things from surgical down to skincare. Can you just talk about how you layer those things for an individual patient, and then we'll throw it back to Scott for any additional questions.
Sure. Yeah, so I believe when I have the consultation with the surgical patient, we always talk about skincare. It's just what you're doing to your skin every day. It has the most influence on how it looks. And so even if you're coming here for a bluff, we really talk about that adjunctive procedures. Now, when I'm doing a surgery, I always recommend having a skin rejuvenation procedure at the same time. Whether that's microneedling, whether that's a CO2, erbium, whether that's a chemical pill, an injectable, appropriate injectable, fat grafting filler, it's all. Surgery only rearranges skin, is what I told them. What you're doing, it doesn't do anything for your skin health. So all these other things are about skin health, and the goal is to be holistic. Surgery is one end of the spectrum. Arguably, in my opinion, I think the other end, the non-surgical, is the most important, because we're not having repeat surgeries over and over again, but what you are having is a repeat toxin, or your repeat skincare, hopefully. Putting your sunscreen every day. You're getting your microneedling every, whatever your maintenance program is. So I really try to engage them to have that holistic mentality. And once you do that, like I was saying earlier, once they get it and it clicks, and sometimes it takes them to see it on themselves, to see that result, I'm like, how do I maintain this? How do I, and then your skincare. It's like we have this whole sheet that goes through skincare. This is your personalized maintenance, what we think that you'll need every so often to achieve your goal and maintain your results. And really not only preaching that to them or educating them on that, but giving them the tools to utilize that, to be able to do it. And so I agree with what Chris said. I don't discount anything, but what I do is if someone has cosmetic surgery with us, they have a little discount on all non-surgical services indefinitely. Why? Because I want to keep you in the loop. I won't go into the details of it, but it doesn't cost us a lot to maintain that, but it's kind of like a hug and a gift and an extension to them. You've had a surgery, which is thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, but here, you're going to do all this non-surgical stuff. You're going to get it. It keeps them here. They already trust us. They've had surgery. So I think it's really about developing that mentality, having your tools to show them, to educate them. And then once they see it, they believe it.
Yeah. Eric or Kevin, any last quick thoughts before we kick it back to Scott?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm sorry, Kevin, I'll be quick. What Dr. Cox said, and I think it's really true. This is one of the things that when I go into my client's office, I really preach to the mid-level providers who are doing injectables, the estheticians, is they need to look at their patients the same way the physicians do. And very frequently what I'll find when I talk to them is they're in a transactional mentality. This person called for Botox, I'm giving them Botox. Establish treatment plans no matter what you do within a practice. If you're an esthetician, establish a skincare plan. If you're an injector, talk about a full non-surgical treatment plan. But use that and you'll create recurring patients as opposed to a transactional patient.
I agree with Eric, and I was just going to add a little bit earlier about discounting and giveaways. I think the really big picture question is, what's your brand, right? I have customers who are about discounting and lower margins and higher volume, and that's okay. Now, we're looking at discounting as if it's bad because most of us try to position ourselves as a different kind of brand. And that's okay too. That's where you can do things like added value, gift with purchase. And so there's a bunch of tactics once you understand what your brand is. And that's all I was going to say.
Great.
Great point.
Yep. Scott?
Well, that's awesome, guys. It's a great experience. And Mason, congratulations on keeping it on time.
Thanks.
One of the things that I just wanted to kind of wrap up with, and as we kind of see if there's any questions, which sometimes there's a lot, sometimes there's none. Panelists do a great job. And sometimes the technology doesn't work and doesn't allow people to ask questions. So first thing I'm going to do is just wrap something up and then kind of throw it out to the group to kick it around. First and foremost, when I think about these discussions around specific topics of running an operating company, it's always important to know that we're running operating companies. These have people and patients and employees, and most everyone that's on this call is operating a business in some way. And this is incredibly challenging. It's also incredibly rewarding, but it's one of the most challenging things you'll ever do in your life is running these businesses. And this is not easy. It's not easy for large corporations. It's not easy for sole proprietorships. It's very difficult. And in the context of the topic of patient acquisition, retention, and conversion, I'd love the panelists just to weigh in on the complexity and difficulty of running an operating company as it relates to these things. And hopefully it's broad, but hopefully there's enough information there for any of you guys to jump in and talk about. Eric,
That's a whole call in it. That's a whole call in itself, Scott.
Just fire away.
Well, I kind of look at it as like everything I do in my practice hurts. It really does. I mean, except for dermaplaning. So I always tell people, it's like, you know what, if you're going to hurt them and you're going to take their money, you better make it a good time. You need to, this is an elective procedure. It is a joyful occasion. It is Disneyland in your space. So if you're excited and your passion about your chosen profession shows to your patient, one, they tend to stay. I mean, I don't look at taking in-base patients. My patients aren't going to leave me. Doc's patients aren't going to leave her. They're there for not only procedures, but they're there because we do an exceptional job in taking care of their needs. I do all kinds of things. I call it event-based planning. Being married to a now retired dentist, dentists are the best at treatment planning because that's where it all kind of started. And I've taken that aspect towards my patients. So I retain them because we start out with, are you doing this for an event? You have a wedding, you have a reunion, what do you have? Why are you here? And then we talk about all of the different things that we can do. And I will plan out their treatments for a year. They will have their calendar. We will book them for a year. So I know who I have coming in to my practice for the next year. One, it takes a little bit of stress off of me because I know I have money coming in, but also it gives us a game plan that we can both look forward to. And we know that we have an end goal in mind. And that's kind of how I've retained my clientele. But also I make sure that, I run on time. I give them more value than what they just came in for. And I make it fun for them because it should be fun. They're giving us their money willingly. They're not there because they're sick. You should make it as fun of an experience as they possibly could have. And that starts at the front desk with the person looking up from the phone and greeting them, all the way to the end with a thank you and a rebooking. So if you look at it as this is truly a wonderful place to be at, and a wonderful business to be within, you will have a better patient retention.
Awesome. Eric, fire away.
So you mentioned patient acquisition. So I thought I'd answer a different question so we can give as much value as possible. I see the biggest mistake I see when I work with people is they make a huge investment on marketing to drive new patient leads to their practice. And then they do not have any kind of structured process to manage that lead into a new patient consultation or a new treatment. They basically hire certain people to do it. They get very little training. They have no way to measure whether they're successful at it or not, and they do not give them systems in most cases to do it. So everyone I work with, I put a CRM in place so that they actually have a regimented process. I actually put a system in place. I train them. Here's how frequently you follow up with this person. Here's the way you follow up with them. We talk to them about how to have the conversation on the phone. And then there's specific steps in that patient acquisition cycle that we actually measure key performance indicators on. If you're not measuring it, you don't know whether you're successful at it. And that's what I can tell you. I've never worked with a practice that I walked into where they're already doing that. And that is where you get the biggest earn on a revenue cycle is literally if you take a practice that's not doing that and put it in place. I've seen practices double within 6 months. You are spending a ton of money to bring new leads to your practice, and a lot of it's falling out of the bottom because you don't know whether your staff's doing what they're supposed to be doing and turn those into patients.
I totally agree on the point you just made, and from personal experience. When I started my own practice last year, in the beginning, I just had 2 employees I have. They were just putting in an Excel sheet. Okay, this Google I came in or whatever, however we got the lead, and then following up, and it was just this kind of arduous, like huge Excel sheet. And then we implemented a app or like an actual program. So one, I can see and trust. Okay, like I trust them, I love them, but it's nice to see in a statistical way, in a measurable way, what leads you're getting, who's coming in the door, who's booking a surgery, because that's where your livelihood is. And it starts with them calling you. You want to make sure through every process, how often are we calling them? What are we saying? Like all the things that Eric just said. I mean, I can't tell you that has been a major difference for the practice.
And even it's not, for me, it's not even about trusting them. It's that just they lose track. If you had 6 leads come in on Monday and they call all of them, but then you have 7 come in on Tuesday, and then you have 5 come in on Wednesday and 8 come in on Thursday. By the time you get to Thursday, they forget about Monday unless there's an actual process to know where am I on each step with each one of these people, and when do I finally say, okay, that's a lost lead. If you don't have a process for doing that, they forget about them because they become overwhelmed with it.
Yeah, for sure.
Kevin, anything you want to comment on that? There is some questions, and I'm going to throw them out there have a ton of time, but I'll get a few of them out. But Kevin, anything you want to add to that? You're on mute, bud. You're on mute.
I think you just need to know your numbers. You need to know how much revenue you're generating per treatment, how much you're paying and what your overhead is, how much a room can be generating in revenue, and really know your numbers. And that's going to help you get to where you need to be.
Great. So one of the questions that just came up, which is interestingly, I was asked this question this week, and it's from Lauren. What are some ways to train our staff who may not be interested in aesthetics?
I answered that one already, and I'll start because I'm pretty blunt about this. I would actually venture to say, is this person the right staff member for your practice, or do you have the right staff? Because if it's not, it shouldn't be up to your staff as to whether they're interested in aesthetics. It's your business, and if aesthetics is a part of your business, then maybe you need to either help them understand how your culture has evolved, or you need different staff. And sorry to be so blunt.
I agree completely with what you said.
You know, I was asked by a dermatologist that just spent 6 months training a nurse that came out of the NICU, and after they had trained the nurse, the comment was, "This really isn't fulfilling, and I want to go back to the NICU." And you know, you're right. I think if it's not a fit, it's not a fit. You know, the thing I'm going to wrap up with as we sign off here and wrap up. And by the way, thank you panelists for coming on. I appreciate your time as always, and thank all the attendees for joining. I think it's been a great experience. One thing I want to leave you with is, you know, I always find it surprising when I talk to new practices or even emerging practices, how little they know about the competitive environment. And if I were opening up, let's say here in Park City, I would really take a lot of time to understand the restaurant environment. I would phantom shop, I'd phantom eat, I'd go to these locations, and I'd learn everything about how they serve food, and how they answer the phone, and how the food is prepared, and what's on the menu, and what the pricing is, and what category they're in, and how they train the staff. And I think it's surprising how little our industry spends in understanding the competitive landscape that they're operating in to make sure they're operating in a competitive way. Because a lot of the techniques that we touched on today may not even work if you're operating in an environment that's at heavy competition. You may just get drowned out with whatever you're trying to do because there's so much embedded competition in the space. So I think it's important to make sure that you understand who your competition is as you're stepping into these kind of competitive environments. So any last comments from any of the panelists or Mason? Everybody's on mute, so it's like the greatest ever for me. Awesome. So thanks everybody for joining. We're going to get this, Adam, who's producing this in the back end, is going to email it out to all of the attendees. We'll also get this out on social, push this to our email group. And thanks everybody for participating, and have a great weekend. Have a great Labor Day.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.